Science is supposed to make life better, right? It's supposed to cure disease, improve technology, and help us understand the world around us. But sometimes science gets a little too confident and things get a little weird. I'm talking like blow up a dead whale, drop cats out of planes, and poison an entire generation levels of confidence. From psychology experiments that spiraled into horror shows to miracle substances turned deadly, today we're taking you on a tour through some of history's wildest moments when science went completely off the rails. Hey guys, and welcome to the Moms and Mysteries podcast, a true crime podcast featuring myself, Mandy, and my dear friend, Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Mandy. How are you?
I don't know why I was so sing-songy today.
I just edited one of our episodes, and it was the same kind of cadence, like a different kind of cadence. So now I'm just excited to see what comes up every week. This is awesome.
Yeah, I know. Well, I try to make it a little different. Some people hate that we have the same boring intro week after week.
And we
Boy, do they let us know.
Having it till the day we die. It makes it easy for editing, and that's all I can say.
Exactly. All right. I am super excited to get into this episode. This is a little bit different. I would say this falls more into the mysteries category, but I guess there aren't really even mysteries now because they've pretty much been solved. But these are some really interesting cases of things that have gone horribly wrong, some things that absolutely should have been a crime in some way. And as we get into it, you'll see exactly what I mean. So it's August 1971 in Palo Alto, California. This was really peak time for bell-bottoms and anti-war protests, but Dr. Philip Zimbardo, who was a Stanford University psychologist, had something else on his mind. He wanted to understand how ordinary people behave in a prison environment. He really was trying to study how power, control, and authority can shape the human mind, which I do agree is a fascinating study, but right off the top, you can see how it could be unethical.
Right. Absolutely.
Sure. So he puts out a newspaper ad that reads, quote, "Men needed for a psychological study of prison life." And then from more than 70 applicants, he chose 24 of them. They were all college-age men, and all of them were considered mentally stable, emotionally healthy, and normal. Half of these men were assigned to be guards of this fake prison experiment, and the other half would be the actual prisoners. So this guy, Dr. Zimbardo, he didn't go and rent out a real jail for his study. He actually built a jail right there in the basement of Stanford's psychology department, which is crazy that Stanford allowed this. This is honestly wild to me. So they built a full-on jail. They installed bars, they replaced office doors with steel locks, they set up a solitary confinement closet, and they even assigned a warden's office. So these volunteers who would be playing guards got uniforms, they got whistles and mirrored sunglasses so that, no one would be able to see their eyes through them. But that anonymity was the gasoline on the fire of this power struggle that ended up ensuing. So these prisoners were told to wait at home for the instructions, and that's when Dr. Zimbardo really added a little theater. He asked the Palo Alto police to actually go and arrest these people. So, on a regular, warm August morning, squad cars pulled up to quiet suburban houses, and neighbors watched as real cops handcuffed college kids on their porches, read them their rights, and tossed them into the back of squad cars. They were then booked at a real police station. They were fingerprinted, photographed, and blindfolded before being driven to the Stanford basement, which had now been rebranded Stanford County Jail.
So inside, the men were stripped naked and they were issued smocks with ID numbers. No names allowed, just numbers. Their ankles are shackled with small chains, and they're told when to eat, when to sleep, and when to speak. Meanwhile, the guards, and these are the same guys who just 2 days ago were playing foosball in the student union, are told to keep order however they see fit. So there are no rules really beyond don't physically harm someone. And Zimbardo tells them, your job is to maintain law and order. And that's it. There's no script. There's no oversight. Just a bunch of 20-somethings with mirrored glasses and really too much free time. By the second day, the prisoners had already had enough.
Can you imagine? It only took 2 days. They were like, wait a minute. No, this is not. This is not going to work.
Number one, how did you get to be a guard? And I'm here as a prisoner.
Right.
And I don't even like this number that you've assigned me. Why can't I use my name? Like the taking away your humanity, even like taking away your name is such a big deal, really,
Yeah, for
and why
sure.
they do it in these kind of things. But it's so crazy, like how something that simple is, really can affect you. So they barricaded their cell doors with mattresses and they started shouting that they refused to follow orders. It was part rebellion, part desperate protest, but of course, somewhere in their heads, they still know this isn't real. But the guards, they take this as a declaration of war. They blasted the prisoners with fire extinguishers, they forced them out of their cells, and they stripped them naked. The guards confiscated mattresses, tore up blankets, and forced everyone to do push-ups as punishment. The atmosphere shifted from this college experiment to an authoritarian nightmare.
So one guard, who was nicknamed John Wayne by the others, started acting like he was really auditioning for a war movie. He developed kind of a swagger about him, and he was barking orders and inventing new punishments for the prisoners of the experiment. He told the prisoners to sing, to clean toilets with their bare hands, and to chant their ID numbers until their voices cracked. Dr. Zimbardo and his team watched all of this go down from hidden cameras, and they were in a separate room. And at first, as they're watching all of this, they're just thrilled, which I don't know why, but they were thrilled.
Yeah.
They think that they are witnessing raw human emotion and behavior. What they're actually watching is people being traumatized in real time.
Just play Sweet Caroline. Everyone has the most realistic behavior and, responses when you play that and do the da-da-da-da.
Right.
That's all you
Yeah.
needed. You didn't need a prison experiment.
Right. But within just 36 hours, one prisoner had a full-blown breakdown. He was screaming, sobbing, and literally begging to leave. Dr. Zimbardo did release him, but he told the others that he was a troublemaker who couldn't handle prison. And so it was just really sending this message that, like, if you resist or, if you crash out, you're going to be labeled as weak and we're all going to make fun of you. So the next few days kind of descended into absolute madness. Some prisoners became really passive. They just got quiet. They were compliant and they seemed pretty broken. But others started acting out. They were being defiant and clearly out of a fear of what was actually going to end up happening to them. But they were definitely not just sitting down and taking it lightly. One of the prisoners went on a hunger strike, and the guards responded by locking him in solitary confinement, and they would bang on the door just to, like, antagonize him, and they would mock him, and just it's wild to think about this happening, like, to a real prisoner, but it's even crazier to think about these things, like, these are just, like, volunteer college students,
Yeah.
like, that are going through this, like, actual traumatizing experience.
So here's the part that really sends chills down your spine. These weren't real criminals or sadistic guards, as Mandy was saying. They're literally students. And yet, within less than a week, cruelty became normal. And even Zimbardo started slipping. He stopped being a scientist and really he started acting like a warden. He was ignoring red flags, encouraged disorder, and he justified everything as data. The only person who saw how wrong it had gotten, and I would like to point out it was a woman, is Christina Mislash, a graduate student and Zimbardo's girlfriend. When she visited the basement and saw the conditions, she was horrified, and she told him, "What you're doing is terrible, and these are people." That confrontation actually snapped him out of it. So this experiment that was originally meant to last 2 weeks was shut down after just 6 days. So when the smoke cleared, or maybe we should say when the fluorescent lights flickered off for the last time, 24 normal young men walked out of that basement changed forever. The prisoners had nightmares and panic attacks for weeks, and the guards tried to justify their actions, saying, "We were just playing our roles." But the line between play and reality had vanished long before the final day. Zimbardo, for his part, became both famous and infamous. He published papers claiming the experiment proved that situational power, not personality, drives cruelty, that under the right circumstances, anyone can become an abuser. And he wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't completely right.
Over the years, other researchers poked holes in his findings. They said the participants actually weren't acting naturally at all. They were trying to please the experiment. And they argued that Dr. Zimbardo encouraged aggression, whether subtly or not, by telling the guards to be tough. But still, the Stanford Prison Experiment became legendary. It appeared in textbooks, documentaries, and even in ethics courses. It inspired movies and even comparisons to real-life tragedies like the abuse at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. Dr. Zimbardo himself later admitted he got caught up in the role and that the power, the illusion of all of it, it really changes people faster than we like to think. In this case, like they had to shut this experiment down in 6 days, and that's how little time it took for people to actually start cracking. But the question remains, did the experiment reveal human nature or did it just create it? But either way, the fallout changed the rules of research forever. Institutional review boards now scrutinize any study involving people, and informed consent is non-negotiable. You cannot manipulate or traumatize participants in the name of science. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Do you know what this kind of reminded me of? I'm going to bring TikTok up again, Mandy. There's a guy on TikTok. There's a guy on TikTok that's doing like every day he's saying something about women that he just didn't know. Like actual period blood wasn't used in pads, like to do testing and stuff. All these different things that like women weren't even involved in a lot of the research. So anyway, I love him. I love what he's doing. It's really interesting. But what it reminded me of is there was a show called Boys and Girls Alone. It was a British show, and it took kids. It's back from 2009. There were kids between the ages of 8 and 11. They put girls in one house, boys in another, and like let them go crazy. So you could do literally whatever you wanted. They're supervising, but they only intervene, like adults only intervene if somebody's going to get hurt. The girls, like first day, they've got like chores. Everyone's got their, things that they're doing. They're making meals, all this stuff. The guys are like putting knives into walls and painting all over. And like it's total anarchy over there.
That
they're
is
like
fascinating.
It's so good. And the boys are like crying at some point because they realize they don't have anything to eat and everything's gone wrong. And the girls, they're like kind of catty fighting with each other. But that's it. So it's interesting to me that this was an all-male study because, again, like I said with the TikTok guy, women weren't included in studies for a long time. And so I wonder if, thank God they didn't do this experiment, but I really do wonder if an all-female version of this would have gone the same way, just in general. It's just something that came up when we've been discussing it. But yeah, I don't know. If you've never seen it, it's actually very, very very interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like something I would really get into.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we have a few more stories to get into for you guys after a quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by IQ Bar, our exclusive snack and hydration sponsor. IQ Bar is the better-for-you, plant protein-based snack made with brain-boosting nutrients to refuel, nourish, and satisfy hunger without the sugar crash. Do you ever have one of those days where you forget whether or not you've eaten, but all you've had really is caffeine and vibes?
That's pretty much me every single day, but I've actually found my fix. IQ Bar's Ultimate Sampler Pack. It's got their bars, hydration mixes, and coffee sticks all in one box.
So that's the one with like 9 bars, and they're all different flavors, right? I'm actually obsessed with the blueberry pomegranate mix. It really makes me feel like I'm hydrating on purpose.
And meanwhile, I'm over here working my way through every chocolate flavor they make. And chocolate chip, almond butter chip. It's like my dessert and my brain food had a baby.
And they're actually good for you. There's no gluten, no dairy, no soy, no weird chemicals, just clean, smart ingredients.
IQ Bar is my new emergency kit. If you see me happy, hydrated, and alert, just assume I've got one in my bag.
And right now, IQ Bar is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, including the sampler pack, plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, text MOMS to 64,000. Text MOMS to 64,000. That's MOMS to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. During volleyball season, my brain's basically a scoreboard. It's half full of game times and half full of snack signups. But Skylight Calendar actually keeps me ahead. It's a digital display that syncs with all of our sports apps, so when a time or a gym changes, it updates instantly.
That's genius. So no more texts like, "Where's the game?" Like when you're already halfway there?
Nope, it's all right there on the wall. Practice times, dinner plans, chores. It's really like having a playbook for family life. Skylight is great for organizing your whole life, but boy, is it important during sports seasons.
Your happiness is Skylight's happiness. So if in 4 months you are not 100% thrilled with your purchase, you can return it for a full refund. No questions asked. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to myskylight.com/moms. Go to myskylight.com/moms for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's myskylight.com/moms.
And now back to the episode. So if you thought watching a bunch of college students lose their minds in a fake prison was unsettling, wait until you hear about the people who thought you could read your personality just by rubbing your skull.
I immediately know.
Immediately know. I have a very lumpy skull. I have calyx on my head.
Would hate this type of science.
I don't need another way for science to make me feel bad about myself.
Exactly.
So this is the idea of phrenology, which is the 19th century's favorite pseudoscience. At its peak, it was taken seriously by doctors, clerics, reformers, and it was used to justify everything from criminality to race hierarchies. The next story begins in Vienna in the late 1700s. So we have this guy, Franz Joseph Gall. He's a physician with an obsession. He believes that the brain was not a single mush of thoughts, but a patchwork of organs tied to mental faculties like language, morality, acquisitiveness, and that those organs, when well used, would push outward on the skull. Thus, the bumps on your head. Thus, personality. I am filled with personality if that's how we're judging it. So in his 1808 work, The Anatomy and Physiology of the Nervous System, Gall laid out the foundations. Gall's method was to examine criminal and mental patients, measure their skulls, and look for correlations. He asserted that the skull's shape mirrors the brain beneath it, that the more developed a trait, the more pronounced the bump above it.
Okay, but would it not be kind of freaky if this was actually real?
Yeah. And I don't know, Mandy. I'm very worried about everything going on in my head. I have a slope on the back of my head. I think my mom didn't lay me the right way.
You would have been like a phrenologist's dream patient.
I really would. Oh my gosh, this is not good. I'm getting scared. Johann Spurzheim, once Gall's student, actually popularized the idea. So he split off from Gall, he toured Europe and England and became the movement's best salesman. Gall's brain localization idea did have a kernel of truth. Different brain areas do specialize. But that leap that your skull shape could reveal character had really disastrous logical gaps. Skull thickness, trauma, variation, none of that mapped cleanly to behavior. So soon this doctrine took on a life of its own. Spurzheim and others expanded this organs list to self-esteem, combativeness, secretiveness, benevolence, hope, ideality, and dozens more. And these faculties got plotted on charts. So between 1820 and 1870, phrenological societies sprouted up. In Britain, the Edinburgh Phrenological Society was founded by George Combe and his brother Andrew. And their influence was huge. They lectured, they published, they collected skulls, and they made maps of the mind, which is a wild sentence that starts strong and gets crazy and then ends fine. So in America, the Boston Phrenological Society launched in 1832, riding this wave of public fascination. Phrenologists gave readings in parlors, at medical fairs, in lecture halls, and it was seen as a moral as well as medical science. Phrenology claimed to reconcile science and faith, so you could study the mind physically, but you could also hold religious beliefs. Many enthusiasts used it to preach self-improvement, better child-rearing, and moral reform.
By the mid-19th century, phrenology was everywhere. People lined up in parlors, they were offering their heads up to be read, and they would purchase phrenology busts and charts and handbooks. They paid money for readings that were supposed to tell them their aptitudes and their weaknesses and even who they should marry, which I'm like, all right, even if it was real, I feel like now you're taking some liberties with this one.
Is it like a Ouija board where they put their hands on your head and they just go around to do the letters of the person
Right. Are you a
marry?
fortune teller or a doctor? What's happening right now? But these people would just sit in a chair and the phrenologist would run their fingers, over their head. They sometimes would use calipers, tape measures all over the skull. They would just make notes of where you have a bump, and say, hey, you have a bump right here. you're ambitious. You have a depression here. There's something else going on.
Your cousin hit
It's
you in
just
the head with a baseball bat as a child.
Exactly. But some charts also included tables that had these numeric scores on them. And this supposedly scientific look at your brain gave the whole thing gravitas, even though the foundation was very flimsy. Phrenologists faced pushback, and critics said the readings were subjective and just kind of hand-wavy and full of confirmation bias. But in 1818, Peter Mark Roget criticized the lack of objectivity, but the believers still pushed on. Some phrenologists responded by introducing calipers, and they attempted to really quantify the measurements they were taking, but the error margin and the skull variation of every different person and this measurement subjectivity kind of, it was a problem for a long time. So across the Atlantic, the idea of phrenology went global. But it became entwined with racial pseudoscience, as phrenologists claimed that European skulls were quote-unquote superior, and they used these readings to justify colonialism, slavery, and what they said were civilizing missions. So the idea that skull shape conferred moral and intellectual hierarchy was deeply wrong, of course, but it was widely accepted by many people at the time. At the University of Edinburgh, their skull room still holds over 1,500 skulls, many of which were actually collected during the heyday of phrenology. Some of them were taken unethically from colonized people and oftentimes without their consent. That legacy of scientific racism still haunts institutional collections. Phrenology also touched politics when President James A. Garfield was assassinated, and his defense called phrenologists to testify about his skull shape and mental characteristics. This movement had really permeated every level of society, all the way up to who we would even consider the elites and people who are in charge.
Thankfully, though, science eventually caught up. Anatomists and neurologists showed that skull shape does not correspond reliably to brain structure. The skull is not a perfect shell over the brain. Skull thickness, injuries, and variation all break this link. Gall's idea that bumps equal mental faculties really collapsed under scrutiny. By the late 19th century, phrenology was largely discredited in medical circles. It was relegated to being quack medicine, carnival sideshows, and spiritualist parlors. But still, it hung on, especially through novelty devices. So, enter the psychograph, a phrenology machine invented in the early 20th century. It was patented in 1905. It measured 32 points on your head and claimed to output personality scores. These machines were installed in theaters and department stores. It was gimmicky and fun and kept the bump reading illusion alive and well in the 1930s. Though discredited, its influence really persisted. People internalized the idea that physical traits like skull shape and head size meant character. That belief actually fueled eugenics, racial hierarchies, and even modern forms of pseudoscience, from IQ tests misused to revivalist racial science. As late as the 20th century, some academics and popular writers revisited phrenology, not as a science, but as a cautionary example, how we can be seduced by the facade of measurement and authority.
I think that's actually such a great point. There's a lot of things that might seem scientific and people will fall for them or believe them because they have charts and graphs and documentation, and it makes it feel like it's a legitimate science. So I do think it's a great cautionary example of how, sometimes common sense should override. You shouldn't just believe everything that you see at face value, or just because somebody has data points or statistics on something. And especially now in this day and age, we know that you have to question everything you see on the internet for sure. I'm glad the internet wasn't around when phrenology was around, because I feel like that combination of things would have been really bad.
It would have taken one TikTok for me to fall all into it and be rubbing my head all over the place.
Yeah. So after centuries of people poking at each other's heads and calling it science, you'd think that we'd learn a little humility. Spoiler alert, we did not, because next came a century-long experiment that basically turned Earth itself into a test subject, all in the name of a quieter running engine. Melissa, I know I haven't. You probably also have not given much thought to how society finally figured out that our gasoline should be unleaded. Most of us, maybe not most of us, a lot of us have grown up with nothing but unleaded gasoline and have just accepted that it's common sense not to put lead in there, obviously. But of course, there's a whole story about why that is and how that even came to be. So on December 9th, 1921, in Dayton, Ohio, scientists at a General Motors lab had poured a teaspoon of TEL, which is tetraethyl lead, into a test engine. And the result was it suddenly went quiet. The knocking sound was gone. That backfire and pinging noise that, pistons make when they're running or firing went away. And this breakthrough really felt like something big. Engineers who were chasing performance believed they had found a miracle. Thomas Midgley Jr., who was working under GM's Charles Kettering, became the name behind this additive. And GM, Standard Oil, and DuPont formed the Ethyl Corporation to produce and market the leaded fuel. They spun this narrative for press, really, that said lead will quiet your engine and boost performance. What many overlooked was that the toxicity of lead was already very well known and documented. Chemists and physicians had warned that lead exposure damaged organs, but yet the industrial momentum prevailed. Within a few years, severe problems started to emerge. In 1924, refinery workers at Standard Oil's Bayway plant in the infamous Looney Gas Building exhibited neurological symptoms such as tremors, delirium, memory loss. There were people collapsing, and 5 people died. So the building earned its nickname for all of its horrors. The industry responded very defensively. They claimed that lead-related incidents were just anomalies, and they insisted that the levels of lead in gasoline were totally harmless, it was safe, and they mounted studies really to dispute any health claims. So the Ethyl Corporation insisted that this additive was harmless when it was diluted and there was nothing to be concerned about. By the mid-20th century, leaded gasoline was ubiquitous. It was the default for virtually every gasoline pump. And its toxicity was invisible, but the danger was very real.
In subsequent decades, the hidden cost became undeniable. Lead from exhaust particles settled into soil, houses, and playgrounds. Children ingested or inhaled lead dust, and their developing nervous systems absorbed it. The result was a diminished IQ, behavioral disorders, attention deficits, and lifelong cognitive injury. In the 1970s, pediatrician Herbert Needleman linked low-level lead exposure to reductions in children's IQs by analyzing lead content in their teeth. His findings challenged prevailing assumptions. Industrial actors and some scientists resisted, but pressure mounted. Simultaneously, chemist Claire Patterson attempted to measure the Earth's age using lead isotopes. He realized that atmospheric lead from gasoline contaminated nearly all of his samples. His environmental crusade exposed how pervasive lead pollution had become. So cities across the United States exhibited classic lead patterns. Neighborhoods near highways, factories, or dense traffic showed far higher blood lead levels in children. In Cleveland, for example, studies found that leaded gasoline contributed heavily to lead exposure, especially in low-income and marginalized communities. Public health advocates and researchers began declaring that there was no safe threshold for lead exposure. Every increment mattered. So by the late 20th century, some epidemiologists proposed that falling lead levels partially explained major drops in crime rates in the 1990s. The lead crime hypothesis became widely discussed. Activists formed campaigns to ban leaded gasoline. In the UK, they had something called the Campaign for Lead-Free Air, or CLEAR, and it helped push government reforms. In the US, the 1970 Clean Air Act empowered the EPA to regulate emissions, including lead. But the phase-out encountered fierce industry resistance. Oil and automotive firms argued cost, engine wear, compatibility, and lack of substitutes. And of course, as you'd imagine, they lobbied hard. With every new regulation came pushback.
The turning point came in 1973 when the U.S. EPA issued rules phasing out leaded gasoline. The auto and oil industries really resisted, but technical demands like protecting catalytic converters really made lead incompatible with modern cars. In 1975, leaded fuel was banned for vehicles equipped with catalytic converters. In 1986, the U.S. mandated a 91% reduction in lead additives. And finally, on January 1st, 1996, leaded gasoline was banned for on-road vehicles in the U.S. I think that was probably the craziest thing to me, was that it was only in 1996 that they finally banned lead in gasoline.
Absolutely wild, because I my whole life have only thought of unleaded
Me
gas.
too.
I never even thought there could have been a leaded version because I was just not old enough. But 1996, I was
That means
13.
that we were
I was
exposed
almost
to leaded
driving.
gasoline. We were exposed to leaded gasoline when we were children.
So now it's the bumps and it's the lead.
I know. I was honestly just shocked by that whole thing.
Wild.
Globally, phase-outs really kind of dragged. Many developing nations continued using leaded gasoline, and over 2 decades, the United Nations Environment Program coordinated a global campaign to retire leaded fuel. In July of 2021, Algeria, who was the final country who was producing leaded gasoline, finally phased it out in July of 2021.
Oh
So
my
for the
gosh.
first time in nearly a century, no driver can legally pump leaded gas anywhere in the world. So estimates now suggest that the ban prevents 1.2 million premature deaths per year, along with countless health damages that have been averted. Yet the legacy of contamination still remains. Soil, old infrastructure, residual lead in many inner-city environments still exist. Health consequences also endured. We've seen lower IQs, increased hypertension, kidney disease, fertility problems, and mental health disorders. Some analysis attribute millions of psychiatric diagnoses, including depression, anxiety, and ADHD, to historical lead exposure, which is actually a topic that I would like to go down and do a little more research on, because I really never, that's not one that I have ever heard, people connecting anything to like historical lead exposure, but that's a really fascinating theory. I don't know why I just found that was just very interesting to me, learning about unleaded gasoline and how we got here.
Absolutely. So, from a global environmental disaster to one very localized one, this next story proves that sometimes bad science isn't done in a lab at all. Sometimes it's done on a beach with a half-ton of dynamite. So, on the Central Oregon coast, a massive 8-ton problem washed ashore on November 9th, 1970. So, this was a 45-foot sperm whale. It was dead, and it was already rotting and attracting a crowd of sightseers. The stench, they said, stank, really, and it was inescapable.
Yeah. I feel like I don't even want to try and imagine it any longer than I just did, because I almost made myself sick.
That big of something,
No.
That's like not a whiff. That's
and
like
a sea animal also? It's like,
no.
Too
many, too much. So the question, though, for local authorities was purely logistical. How do you get rid of a putrefying marine giant? So that responsibility fell to the Oregon State Highway Division, which doesn't actually make any sense. And they were hilariously in charge of coastal beaches at the time. That would be a very good time to be like, that is not my job description.
No, we need beach patrol. Highway patrol.
Not my job title. There is nothing. So their engineer, George Thornton, later complained that his colleagues had conveniently gone deer hunting during this time, leaving him with this awful task. Burying the whale would be too complicated. The carcass was really just too large, and cutting it up was voted against because imagine the hours, imagine how nasty that would be, and how much was involved in dismembering 8 tons of decaying flesh.
Hard pass.
You know, our friend Rebecca, she actually is a volunteer in New York State. So when a whale comes offshore, she goes and helps with whatever it is they're going to do with it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. She's like, yeah. Oh
she loves whales. But so she's done that before. She sent me a picture and I was like, that's crazy. So I don't understand, I still do not understand how Highway Patrol got involved in this at all.
They didn't have any Rebeccas back then, I guess.
I guess not. So they ended up deciding on this plan that was really unorthodox, but it was also very, very American. Cue the eagles flying overboard as we blow it up with dynamite. So the idea was that the resulting pieces would be small enough for scavenger animals like seagulls and crabs to dispose of it. So Thornton, lacking any precedent whatsoever, chose 20 cases of dynamite, which is a half ton of explosives, or roughly 1 case for every ton of whale.
I wonder how they mathematically worked that out.
Honestly, I mean, you just got to be like, what if it was like, okay, it's 5 cases? 5 doesn't actually sound like enough to get this done. I think like 20 is like, we mean business. That's
Right?
a
Like,
we
you want
mean
to make
business number.
sure there's
Mhm.
nothing left. Yeah.
But we'll get to it. There's an explosives expert named Walter Umenhofer who, I mean, was he an explosives expert or did he like take toll booth money like out on the highway? Who knows? We don't know. There's no way to tell. But he's there all day. And later he claimed that he told this guy, "Hey, 20 sticks of dynamite, that'll do you good. Not 20 cases." But he was like, "No, I'll take the cases." So on November 12th, 1970, with news cameras rolling and a crowd of spectators watching from a distance that they deemed to be safe, they detonated the charge. What followed became a textbook example of government decision gone spectacularly, grotesquely wrong. And this blast was huge. It momentarily vaporized the whale in a cloud of smoke and flame. The crowd cheered, thinking it was a success, but then the thudding started.
Oh boy. And you can only imagine what the thudding was. So once the whole, boom of this explosion kind of quiets down, now people can hear the sound of raining debris. And it could only be chunks of whale blubber that are some like ones, like the size of desks even. And these pieces of whale are being hurled hundreds of feet through the air.
Imagine getting knocked in the head by a,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's worse than a horror movie.
Oh,
Or even just being anywhere nearby and or what if you didn't even know they were doing this and you're just like sitting on your porch like a mile away and all of a sudden here comes like whale guts like raining out of the sky. Like, what in the world?
yeah.
I don't even know.
I
So
think that the highway patrol did this on purpose to be like, take us off this. This is not for us.
yeah. Well, also in like 1970, I feel like we had a lot more knowledge back then. Like, you should have known that blowing up an animal was not gonna
We've
be like
always
a
been dumb.
clean wow, I don't know. I have no words for that. So the cameraman for KATU TV in Portland, his name was Doug Brazil. He was, filming this and his camera lens was covered with fish guts, and a news reporter named Paul Linman reported, quote, "The blast blasted blubber beyond all believable bounds."
That is, we're moms and mysteries with Melissa and Mandy, but that is too much alliteration for me.
I was like, honestly, though, how did he even come up with that on the spot? Like, I'm so impressed with Paul right now.
He done good.
He really did. But the worst victim of the flying blubber wasn't a person, thankfully, but an inanimate object. It was a car. A massive 300-pound slab of this blubber traveled a quarter of a mile and crushed the roof of a brand new 1970 Oldsmobile 88 sedan. That Oldsmobile actually belonged to Walter Umenhofer, the very man who tried to advise Thornton on the proper amount of explosives that he needed.
I could not believe that. That is
I know.
absolutely wild. I would be so ticked off if that was that man. He's tried everything to make this work, and it came after him?
Well, to make matters worse, he had actually just bought the car from a local dealership, and the dealership's motto was, get this, come to us for a whale of a deal.
Mm-mm. No, I would think I was in
It's
the
too
Truman
perfect.
Show at this
I know,
point.
it's too
Yeah.
perfect. I know.
Mm-mm.
So Umenhofer was paid the full value of the car by the state within 2 days. But the ultimate irony is that most of the whale was still there, rotting on the beach. Only a fraction of it had been blasted, and the remaining sections of it were so large that really no one's going to want to go near that. Not even the seagulls are going to attempt to clean up that mess. And so the highway crew ended up having to bury all the large pieces, whatever was left of this whale. But this incredible story was largely forgotten outside of Oregon until 1990, when Dave Barry wrote about it in his syndicated column after acquiring the archival news footage of this event. And he wrote, quote, "I'm probably not guilty of understatement when I say that what follows on the videotape is the most wonderful event in the history of the universe."
I do love David Barry.
Me too. But that column and the subsequent circulation of the video on the internet turned the organ exploding whale into a viral global phenomenon. Have you ever heard of that story?
No, I mean, no.
No, I haven't either.
It's one of those stories that sounds like you would have heard of it, and
Yeah.
maybe you did, but I feel like I'd remember
Yeah.
an exploding whale.
Strange. Very,
Yeah.
very strange. All right, guys, we have a couple more stories to get into, believe it or not, after one last break to hear a word from this week's sponsors.
And now back to the episode. So, Mandy, if blowing up a whale didn't convince you that humans should not be left unsupervised with science, maybe this next one will. Because in the 1950s, when malaria broke out in Borneo, the World Health Organization tried to fix it. And the result was cats. Not the movie, which I watched part of and it was terrible. It was cats falling from the sky. So the story of Operation Cat Drop, because we'd hate to call it anything else, is another classic case study in unintended consequences, often used today to teach systems thinking. So it began, as so many of these stories begin, with the best of intentions. In the 1950s, the Dayak people of Borneo were suffering from a severe malaria outbreak. The World Health Organization, or WHO, responded by authorizing a massive campaign to spray the villages with the highly effective insecticide, DDT, to kill the disease-carrying mosquitoes. And the spraying worked. The rates of malaria dropped, but the single action of introducing DDT began an ecological domino effect that threatened to wipe out the entire community. The DDT didn't just kill mosquitoes. It killed a species of parasitic wasps that was the natural enemy of a type of thatch-eating caterpillar. I hate when this happens. And with that predator gone, the caterpillars multiplied exponentially, devouring the palm-thatched roofs of local homes. So suddenly, the villagers had collapsing roofs open to the elements. But the threat was even greater than just structural damage. The DDT-contaminated insects, like cockroaches and the hardy caterpillars, were then being eaten by local geckos. Because DDT does not break down easily, it accumulated in the geckos' bodies through biomagnification, which we all know what that is.
Of course.
I'm just going to keep going because you guys are way too smart for this. The sickened, sluggish geckos were then an easy meal for the village's beloved domestic cats. The cats received a lethal, concentrated dose of the poison. So the cats began to die off in large numbers, disrupting the next level of the food chain.
With the cats gone, the natural order of the jungle was really in shambles, and an even greater threat emerged. The local rat population exploded. They multiplied completely unchecked. They were eating vital grain in food stores, and worse, these rodents carried fleas that posed a risk of plague and typhus.
Like, this is like such a circle of horrors. This is terrible.
It just never ends. Like, it just keeps going and going and going. So the Dayak people faced a true disaster. They had collapsing homes, there was famine, and lethal epidemics, all thanks to a very well-intentioned program to fight malaria. In desperation, they appealed to the British authorities. The solution was, to put it mildly, quite bizarre. The Royal Air Force was tasked with what was essentially a massive airlift of pest control, and they carried out this mission in March of 1960. It was called Operation Cat Drop, and the Royal Air Force used giant Beverly transport planes flying out of Singapore. They had acquired a group of cats from, I don't even know how they
a recruitment drive?
Cats from a recruitment drive from the city of cats, which... I don't know.
It's like the army coming to your school and talking to you and
like,
seeing if you want to sign up. Yeah.
I guess, yeah. So even though the story has been exaggerated over time, some sources will say that as many as 14,000 cats were, dropped from the sky. But the original news reports only cite 23 cats. And these 23 cats were packed expertly into wicker baskets and then also expertly parachuted into the remote area where they wanted them to go and attack these rodents,
oh my gosh.
I guess. Yeah. Hundreds of the locals there watched this unusual cat drop, which also they sent about 7,000 pounds of equipment down to them as well. And the mission was reported as being a success. So the new cats, which the villagers affectionately called the army of cats from heaven, got straight to work. They were hunting the rats, and they were really restoring the ecological balance that human error had so violently tripped. So it remains a legendary cautionary tale of how one small targeted action, which was in this case the spraying of DDT, can have really unforeseen and cascading, long-term consequences. Honestly, I feel like this story is like a representation of like my life sometimes where I'm like, you just do
Right?
one thing and then like next thing you know, everything is like spiraling out of control. But this is obviously on a massive scale. I
Yeah.
do think it's interesting though that they would just like, I don't understand how they just sent new cats in and how come the new cats didn't get poisoned?
Maybe the DDT at that point had quantified in the other animals and they stopped being so sick and they were like,
Maybe.
I don't know. But you know what? If I lived in that village, you know what I would say? No thanks. Don't drop the cats. You've done enough. Get out of here. Please don't give us any more help. You're literally
Yeah.
killing us. I would imagine seeing those cats fall from the sky did not feel like heaven at first. It had to have felt
No.
like a nightmare.
Yeah.
Wild. All right, so let's shift from the absurd to the tragic because not every scientific disaster comes with parachutes and fur. This one actually glowed in the dark, literally, and it cost hundreds of young women their lives. So during the height of World War I, a new element called radium was really all the rage. It was a cultural miracle substance sold as a health tonic and a cure-all, but its deadliest reality was in the factories. So here, there's hundreds of young women, now known as the Radium Girls. They were there employed to paint watch faces and instrument dials for the U.S. Radium Corporation. So this luminous paint was marketed under the brand name Undark. The work was considered high class, they were well paid, and it was really a modern job for the time. Their job was actually to use their lips to point the fine camel hair brushes to a perfect tip after dipping them in paint. And this practice was known as lip dip paint. Some of these names are just, let's go back and, rework this. So the inventor of the paint and the factory supervisors assured them that the substances were harmless, even beneficial. These young women really embraced the glow. The radium powder dusted their hair and their clothing, making them shimmer. They would even paint their nails, their teeth, and eyelids with the luminous material for fun, and their bodies were glowing like ghosts in the dark. They had no idea that they were ingesting a fatal dose of radiation every single day. And radium is chemically very similar to calcium, as once it's ingested, it's quietly absorbed by the bodies and deposited deep within your bones, essentially turning your skeleton into internal radiation sources. So really, the clock was ticking on their lives.
Horrifying. So the symptoms started to appear a few years later. They were dental pain, loose teeth, and then a condition that's now known as radium jaw, which is a form of necrosis where the jawbone literally begins to crumble and fall away from the skull. By 1924, 50 women were gravely ill and over a dozen had already died. The U.S. Radium Corporation responded with a campaign of denial and really callous cruelty. They hired doctors to attribute the women's agonizing deaths to other causes, including attempts to smear their reputations by suggesting that terminal illness that they had was syphilis, which was a sexually transmitted disease that carried a massive stigma at the time. So yeah, they're like, it's definitely not the radiation that these women have been around. It's it's an STD. So that truly
Wild.
horrible. But their fight for justice began in 1927 when 5 women, including Grace Fryer and Catherine Wolfe Donahue, began their lawsuit. The press, who recognized the profound tragedy here, called them the 5 living dead. The legal battle was brutal. It was hampered by legal delays and the company's continued attempts to postpone the hearings until the women died and the case disappeared. In 1928, facing massive public backlash after seeking an adjournment, the U.S. Radium Corporation offered an out-of-court settlement. The women accepted a $10,000 lump sum, a $600 annual annuity for life, and the payment of all their medical and legal expenses. This, of course, is a meager compensation for what these women have, which is a life sentence, and they're definitely going to die from being exposed to this radium, but it was still a victory. The subsequent case in Ottawa, Illinois, was even more dramatic. Catherine Wolfe Donahue, who was dying of cancer, was too frail to attend the final hearing and had to testify from a stretcher. She actually even collapsed during her testimony. She died just one day after the company filed its final appeal, and the 5 women that had brought the original lawsuit, actually won. Their case and the agonizing sacrifice became a pivotal moment that forced the development of crucial occupational health and safety laws, ensuring that no worker would ever again be told that a fatal dose of poison was safe. Stories like these ones really scare me. I've actually heard of the Radium Girls before, but stuff like that freaks me out to think about because yeah, at the time they didn't know, or it wasn't like a known thing, but then that means that could happen again. Something similar could happen
Oh, yeah.
again, right? Like we don't know what we don't know. And so, I get that now we have these different safety laws and we have these different regulations, but that doesn't mean that like something like this could not happen again in the future.
Oh, for sure. All of these stories, it feels like we're not too far off from some of them
Right.
happening again. These are all really fascinating. I knew of the Stanford Prison Experiment, but I didn't know most of those details, and that just absolutely blows my mind. And I still don't know how to feel about that. But these are wild stories, and I'm glad we got to discuss them.
Me too. This was a fun one. Let us
It
know what you
was.
guys thought of this episode, and we will be back next week. Same time, same place, new story.
Have a great week.
Bye.